Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Amen.
Christ is our King. Today, Lord, we claim you as our King. We try again to reconcile everything in our lives to you, so that everything about us, about our lives, is in line with the way you call us to live, the way you create us to be. You tell us no one knows the time or the season when the Son of Man will come again. You tell us to be prepared. So as we come together today, we entrust ourselves to you that you can really send your Spirit upon us to guide us in this moment of preparation, so that when that moment comes, whether expected or unexpected, we can be prepared. First and foremost, our consciences can be ready. Our souls can be prepared for the return back to you. So we ask you to pour out all of that grace upon us today, every day of our lives, so that we can travel this journey with you, in communion with you, relying on the graces, especially the sacramental gifts that you give us. And again, we ask you to bless our speakers, especially Stephen and ourselves, as we come together today. So we ask this as we ask all things through Christ our Lord. Amen. Holy Spirit, amen. All right. So, Vinny, are you going to stand right there?
I don't know. I'm not moving. You want to move somewhere?
So I'm just trying to, it's just getting used to talking to everybody with you right in front of me. So I just wanted to, again, offer a quick word of welcome to this talk today. As I mentioned in Mass today, at a certain age, everybody should have a will, should really have an advance directive. So if there's ever a moment where you can't make decisions for yourself, there's someone authorized to make these medical decisions, healthcare decisions for you. And that this document would say what those decisions are, so that it can be certain that they are your wishes. So at some point in life we should all have these, but it's easy to procrastinate. It's easy just to, yeah, I know I need them. So today is a day where we can at least get one step closer to that process. I gotta admit, I think as priests, it's probably a little easier for us to talk about death maybe than for some, because we're surrounded, we encounter it a good bit. We encounter a lot of families who are grieving. Personally, for myself, my father passed away right before I went in the seminary, so I guess about probably 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago. And that was my first experience with a death of someone that close to me. And it was a very powerful experience. Certainly a very emotional experience, and one of those experiences that just kind of throws you, kind of rocks your world until you kind of figure some things out. He probably made it pretty easy by the way he lived his life. He lived a very good life, but he also had a good outlook on death. He knew it was coming for everybody. His father died when he was about 3. His mom died when he was about 12. So, his expectation, he didn't know how long he had. So he was trying to make the most of every day and always be prepared. So if he would have some type of ailment or wasn't feeling too good, he'd always say, call Humphreys, which is the local funeral parlor in Rockville. So he heard that many times, call Humphreys. And then he would talk about the house that I grew up in and most of my brothers and sisters grew up in. And I don't know how it would come up, but he'd always say he wanted to leave their feet first. So, he wanted to spend the rest of his life in that house. And when it was time, that's the place from which he would leave. So it was really pretty interesting. He was in the hospital, and he had had some health problems. He was in and out of the hospital, heart problems. And he got to the point where, I think it happens quite a bit, he was unable to swallow. His health was questionable. Would he be able to go through a procedure to address it? They had done many things for him at that point, and he wasn't even quite sure if he did go through the procedure, would it increase the quality of his life? And it was so questionable that he made the decision not to go through with the procedure. If I were to give you more details, you would see it. It was a very prudent decision at the time. But I remember the doctor saying to him, you know what this means? They wanted to do more and more procedures. They weren't quite sure it was going to increase the days, the number of days, or the quality of days, quantity or quality. So I still look back at that as a really courageous decision, that he was the one who had to say, enough, that's enough. And from that I realized we have a right to life, and we have a right to death. When death is naturally coming for us, it's our right to let that happen, to let it happen gracefully and peacefully. So he did come home, had some days at home where everyone in the family came to visit and really say some goodbyes. And then he died, there at home. And it was really pretty amazing. It's a very memorable image in my mind. It was a really super clear night. After he passed away, Pumphrey's did come, and they prepared his body, and they rolled him out the house, literally, feet first, from the sidewalk, from the house to the front sidewalk, down to their van. It's one of those images just etched in my mind. It was a really clear night. The moon was probably out, and he left the house feet first, as he had really wished, as he really desired. During this whole process, I was talking to my oldest sister, and we were talking about these days where he was dying, and he would kind of say some things that didn't make total sense in this world, but it seemed that she was saying that he had one foot in the next world and one foot in this world. And we could begin to get a sense of something was happening. So it was I think the comfort that I found was when it seemed that he wasn't just dying, that this wasn't just the end, that something was happening in these days, that it just seemed very clear that there was a change going on, that this wasn't just the end, but everything that we believe and that we hear from our faith seemed to be playing itself out, that he was, in a sense, being born into this eternal life. So, as difficult as it was a really peaceful experience and a very comfortable memory, because it was the completion of a really full life. So, I guess with that, my mom died years later. So I've had some personal experiences with death, and then many experiences as a priest with those who are dying, with those who have a loved one who had just died. So I think, I pray that it's a grace that I have a certain peace with things related to this. No one of us knows the day. It's not always a matter of age. It could happen in a moment to anybody, or it could be something that takes some time, and it could happen later in life. So it is the great equalizer. It's something that all of us really have to address. I think when we address it, we can live life a little more freely with one less thing to worry about. We can live life with a deeper faith that things have a perspective. So that's my hope for today, is that this day brings us a little closer in that direction. Maybe you're already there. Hopefully you're already there. But it's hopefully it will take us a little closer to that with some really specific things. I mentioned at Mass that some parishioners here prepared their own funerals before they died. They met with Pat and the bereavement ladies and went over the music and the readings and who they wanted to do various things in the Mass. And I just think that's a very powerful experience. That's, as I said before, that's really being prepared when you are at that point. So they're here as well in case anybody wants to do that. We can talk about that process. We're a little concerned about some of you, maybe if your children aren't practicing the faith and aren't really committed to giving you a funeral when that time comes, or if you don't have children to take care of those things. We want to be there for you and we want to be able to put some of that stuff in place so that at least we'll know what your wishes are, so we can do our best to bring those about. I always want to say, if it happens, if it happens. If the second coming doesn't happen first. So we're going to save Steve for last. He's going to talk about a will and advance directives. And then he's happy to work with anybody who wants to go through that process. Father Andrew's going to talk about some of the other issues associated with these end-of-life issues. So thanks again for coming.
So as Father Mark mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit, very briefly, about kind of the actual sort of planning, or what was involved in planning of a Catholic funeral liturgy. But before I say that, I'm going to say something about kind of what precedes, of course, the funeral itself, and then actually something at the sort of end, which are just two important things to keep in mind. So the first, especially if one is going to be relying on family members, kind of as one gets closer to the end, to kind of prepare these things and kind of address, what your preferences would be. I would say it's important to kind of have on their radar that if it's not a sudden death, right, if it's kind of a process where somebody is kind of slowly meeting the end, that you don't have to wait to the very last minute to call a priest. So just actually, the reason I have this kind of at the forefront of my mind is just a couple of days ago, we actually got a call, and I went over, and the person had already passed away. And of course, there are prayers, right, that one can do with the family after somebody is deceased. But there are any number of prayers that the church kind of provides for which precedes that, right? And of course, receiving the sacrament of the anointing. And then I guess what's kind of most important to me after my 3.5 years of priestly ministry, where I have all the answers now, what is important to me, and I always kind of regret this, is when I get a call and the person is maybe already intubated or kind of unconscious, and they're not able to receive Eucharist, and not able to receive Viaticum. Right? Of course, there are prayers, right, that I can do with the family and I can provide for them, but when it's gotten to that point, there are certain options that are no longer possible. So I say this all to just kind of have at your kind of forefront of your mind, and when you're communicating with whoever might be kind of responsible when the time comes, that they should feel free to call the church kind of sooner rather than later. They don't have to wait till the very end. Okay. So that's kind of obviously before the person has passed. At the kind of very end is to have some sort of arrangement for internment or burial. Because regardless if a person is cremated or not, right, the remains should ultimately be interred, right? They shouldn't be scattered. They shouldn't remain on a mantle. Because, again, regardless of cremation or not, these are still the remains of a human person, right? Made in the image and likeness of God, owed a certain reverence, right? And so there should be some sort of arrangements made, right, for how the body will finally be disposed before being raised to the Lord at the end of days. So again, that's kind of the very end of the process, and then also before that, of course, to kind of make sure people are aware that they don't have to wait till the last minute to call the church, so that the church can provide all that God has given, especially sacramentally, to prepare the person as they're dying. Now, with regard to the funeral itself, increasingly I find that people are foregoing a funeral mass. Why that is, I'm not exactly sure, but the kind of the norm, the preference, of course, is that the person is prayed for. They're finally commended through this Mass, right? The Mass is the highest prayer of the Church, right? Our very lives are a participation in the mystery that is made present at Mass, the Paschal mystery. And so it is the norm, the Church's preference, that this person is prayed for with a funeral Mass, right? Increasingly, sometimes people just ask for kind of prayers at a funeral home, but again, the preference would be certainly for a Mass. In terms of the preparation for Mass, and Pat can correct me if I'm missing some of the details But when you would arrive, if you were to come here, right, to plan the funeral liturgy, there are a few things that we would have to kind of address. The first would be that occurs to me is readings. There are specific readings. They're beautiful readings that are kind of course, related to this mystery of life and death. So you would, if you were going to plan ahead of time, have to pick out those readings. And there's, of course, music, right? Now, what we've kind of gone to here is that, David, our music director, is very talented. He can come up with kind of beautiful music that would be appropriate to the liturgy. But when we're doing the planning, we always ask first if there are particular hymns, right? Particular music that is important to the person, and we want to make sure that we can include that, right? There are basically 4 or 5 places in the liturgy where there would be music, and so that kind of gives you up to 4 or 5 options for music. Again, it's not something that I guess is critical, except that if you really wanted a particular hymn, right? And that's something to kind of specify, because when we meet with the families, sometimes they're kind of trying to remember, mom and dad like this, and that, but again, in that moment, it's very difficult, and it's a very kind of trying period, so those things might not necessarily readily come to mind for them. So if there is something important that you would like, it's something to specify ahead of time. With the readings, we try as much as possible to include the families to participate in the liturgy, right? So our preference would be actually to have somebody from the family serve as a lector doing the readings. But it's good if that's going to be the case to maybe have some people in mind who would do that, because especially if they weren't practicing, they might not be familiar with kind of how to lector at Mass. So if somebody wants to have certain family members participating, I think it's important to have that kind of spelled out ahead of time and to make sure that they are comfortable with being able to do that. So to figure out who might be a lector, family or friend. Related to that is eulogies, right? A eulogy is not a part of the funeral liturgy, but obviously there's something to be said for having a eulogy. Here, we usually do that before, not always, but usually do it before Mass. The idea being that the eulogy provides, especially for those who aren't as familiar with the person that we're about to pray for, some kind of context of who it is that we're praying for, right? But if there's going to be a eulogy, that's another thing to kind of have in mind maybe ahead of time. This might be a good person to be the one to do that, if there's a desire to have a eulogy. A good place also, I would just say, as sort of an aside, for people to offer remembrances might be something like the wake. That's of course, something that's also kind of ideal, is that even before the funeral liturgy itself, there's some kind of wake service. And that kind of venue provides a good opportunity to have people to offer a kind of eulogy or some kind of reminiscence about the deceased. But if it's going to be at the funeral liturgy, it might be a good idea to have some person or persons in mind. Usually we have 1, maybe 2, and we try and keep them to 5 to 7 minutes. And again, and then the last thing, of course, that I would speak about, and Pat, remind me if there's other things that we should mention about the planning, is, and again, just of course, some kind of plan for after the funeral, where the deceased person will be interred, right? Will it be buried? Because again, part of what we're doing here is, of course, respecting, right, that this person is body and soul, right, and that the resurrection itself will be the resurrection of the body, right, and so that there should be some kind of honoring and attention to the remains of the person, right, and that they are treated properly. So I don't know if we're saving questions at the end, or
Do a little question
about this
part.
about this part
and
first.
then, do the part next.
Yeah. So that was kind of a whirlwind. But does anybody have any sort of questions at this time about kind of funeral liturgy planning, or yes?
A lot of wakes are now being conducted in the church area. remembrances at the wake, is that something that could easily be done in the church setting also?
I mean, I would say so, yeah. I mean, as long as there's some kind of planning a little bit about what the wake will look like.
Right,
Because there's also prayers that go along with the wake itself.
right.
And so I think that, if it was done in a church, and it sort of organizes, there was a kind of time frame that, the prayers could be conducted, and then that might be a natural sort of segue, since everybody's sort of been quieted down, to then a eulogy or some kind of words of remembrance. And that certainly be done in church.
We're just cautious on who we give a microphone to.
Yeah.
Yes, I understand.
That's why I said it's good to maybe have in mind who might be doing it.
Right.
Ed?
Just wondered, in the case where there's a cremation, is it important to have the mass before the cremation, or is it?
Ideally, the cremation would take place after, that the body would be present for the funeral liturgy. That would be kind of the norm, the hope. Yeah.
It's a little cumbersome. But yes, what the church asks is, it says cremation is okay, but it says that the body should be present for the funeral. So logistically what this means is getting the casket, having the body prepared, and then after the funeral, have the cremation done. So it's a lot of work to do it that way. We do plenty of funeral with the cremains and no body. So that's what the church asks. They don't, and, it's not the only option, but that's what they say is the best.
At my aunt's funeral, they had a book from the altar in her casket. Because they're not destroyed, they bury them. And that is a practice at the resurrection of the Lord tomorrow. Is that something that's done here?
People are buried with rosaries or crucifixes or,
Right, she had all those, but also it's big.
it's not the norm, but I don't see any problem with it. How about, who has something on you that says, I'm Catholic, call a priest? Remember, do you? Yeah, but no, it's kind of old school. We look for some of these, we're trying to find some of these to give one to everybody, either a card or a medallion of some sort. So, there was a time where this was really the tradition, to make it known that if something happens to you, you're Catholic, you want a priest to come and anoint you or offer prayers. So, we'll keep looking for them, and if we can find them, we'll give them out to everybody. Any other questions?
On the reading of, and those are chosen to be readers, why is it that they have to be practicing Catholics?
Why is it, did you hear the question? So if you're gonna have someone read at a funeral, Catholic funeral, why is it that they should be a practicing Catholic?
I would say to that question, because it is a liturgical action, right? It is that the readings, Mass is one, right? It's a one action of the church, and the readings are the liturgy of the Word, proclamation of the Word of God, and so, it should be done by somebody who is a member of the church.
So on a regular Sunday, a regular Mass, what it says is someone from the congregation comes forward and proclaims a reading. So the congregation typically is a gathering of the faithful of that religion, the denomination of that parish. So it makes most sense that for a funeral to stay true to that, someone from that congregation, someone who is practicing Catholic work. Again, on the practical side, they're the ones who would be most familiar with what everybody's expecting at a Mass. They'd be the least likely to do something that's going to distract someone and take them out of a prayerful state. Why they do that? Why practicing? I know someone who's a practicing Catholic because you want, as they're saying these words, contradiction, not something that's gonna throw people, and, so you want someone who's practicing Catholic for those reasons.
Aren't there exceptions to that?
Always,
Yeah.
almost always. I make a lot of exceptions. The ultimate thing is salvation of souls. So everything we do is toward the goal of salvation of souls. So we make exceptions kind of based on that a charity or, yes, Mary Catherine?
I was one of those exceptions. When my dad died, my sister is Jewish, so we asked the priest if it would be okay if she read the Old Testament reading, which is what she did.
Okay.
And she was raised Catholic, so she knew.
Okay, so, Pat, Kay, Patricia, any thoughts on if anybody is interested in doing this? What should they do? Call you? Call Marie?
Yeah, they first call the office. The office in turn notifies Pat Hughes.
Okay.
Pat and Father Andrew get together and help the family plan. And then they let me know if they're interested in having a luncheon.
Okay. So luncheon is a whole nother thing.
We have a funeral planning sheet that if somebody wanted to do plans in advance, they could fill out the sheet in advance with some of their ideas or choices and put it on file in our office right now.
So so what if someone here says, all right, I want to be prepared, I want to get it done now. Just call Marie, she'll set them up with you guys and you'll either give them this sheet or go over it with them.
That will.
Yeah.
All right.
And that has been done
Yeah.
frequently, and right now Mary Lou Milstead is in that process.
Okay. Good, well, thank you. All right, so if more questions pop up, we can answer them at the end. Thank you, Father Andrew. I also want to thank Stephen Mudd for being here today. We're going to hand things over to him so he can talk about the other aspects of this, which is the will and the advance directive. Stephen Mudd, Esquire, former graduate, Holy Redeemer School.
Thank you, Father Marcy and Father Andrew. Fine. I'm Steve Mudd. I'm an alumnus of the school from 1997, so I've been 24 years. Oh my God, I was 25. That's scary to think about. It's a lot's changed there. And I'm more probably known because my dad does the spaghetti and bacon breakfast, and my beautiful goddaughter is Therese Bell, who is I think our youngest daily master, although she's now in school, so she's not been going as much. Sorry, Father. Okay, so what's an estate plan? Alright, so basically what it is 4 documents. It's there's an advanced medical directive, a power of attorney, a last will and testament, and a declaration of disposition of last remains, if you want the technical word for it. Basically, and there's also a couple other things we can get into. There's custodial authorizations agreements for minor children, trusts, which are fun, succession planning for businesses, and beneficiary designations, which gets into more retirements, insurances, plans like that. But basically the goal of all these documents is to have clarity and ease for your loved ones so they know what to do, and so there aren't any questions, and people aren't freaking out on, where the funeral's supposed to be, if they wanted to be cremated or buried or, entombed and whatnot. All right, so first up, the medical directive. I would say this is probably the most important one of them all because this is about your health. This is about your personhood. And there's two big components to it. The first part is more, or alternatively called the medical power of attorney or the designation of a healthcare agent. And this is where you get to decide if something happens to you, who do you want to make medical decisions? My old boss, Tom Gentile, used to give these, who used to do this all the time for 30 years, always said that, when you pick an agent, you have to make sure that it's somebody that you trust with your life and that it's somebody that you know that's going to follow through with what you want done. For example, like if you maybe you're a widower or widowee, and you have like 3 children, and they will not get along, and they will fight and bicker over what to do. Maybe you want to ask a niece or nephew of yours, or a good friend that's a little younger than you, to make these decisions, rather than having your children try to do this out. And the main goal of this part is to avoid what we have a guardianship or conservatorship. It's when, because if you don't have this, the court, what happens is if you're in a nursing home, or if you're deemed incompetent, or if a hospital finds that you are unable to make any medical decisions, and they are not satisfied with the person or the family that's making decisions, they can actually petition the local family court or circuit court in Maryland, or the Superior Court in DC, and file a petition to name a guardian for you. And that person, who is appointed by the court, actually has power over your body, and you basically lose any sort of control over it. Sometimes it's rare, but sometimes it can be a social worker, or it could be a person from the Department of Social Services. Sometimes can be appointed as your guardian of the person. Normally they try to find a family member that will do it, and a lot of times when these happen, it's like the first line, the spouse or the child is just not able to make the right decision, so they're going to like a grandchild or a niece or nephew or a sibling to kind of override it, so that way they can get that person the right care they need. The second part of the medical directive is what we call the living will, and this is where it gets really technical, and this is where I think you really need to talk to your medical doctor and your priest, because there are lots of scenarios that can throw out at you at like end of life decisions. The 3 big ones are like a terminal illness, which is if you have cancer. The other one is permanent non-consciousness, which is when you're brain dead, and the other one is frailty or old age. All these scenarios are going to list out. It's totally optional if you want to pick them or not pick them, but you have the option of saying when you want life-sustaining procedures removed. And this, I cannot emphasize. I get a lot of questions on this. I am a lawyer, and lawyers do make the rules, and we do let ourselves make, for whatever reason we have decided, because lawyers make the rules, we've decided that we are able to become your priest, your doctor, your accountant, your architect, your business person, and everybody else. I kind of disagree with it in some ways. It's supposed to be a joke, didn't go over well. Lawyers are very egotistical, if you didn't know. I personally, and I know my boss Tom was totally not of that mindset. I know we believe that it's, this is a group effort, this is very interdisciplinary, and social workers as well. You really should consult, before you sign on the dotted line, I really would encourage you to talk to your doctor and also your priest, because there are a lot of scenarios I hear. And I went to Catholic school for most of my life. I got like a master's in philosophy, but I have no understanding, but I really do not know Catholic theology. And I cannot give you the right information about when that point is. I don't know if Father wants to chime in or not, or if he has. I think it's very circumstantial, but if you want to, or?
Well, I think an easy way to understand it is if it's a consideration of a procedure or to not have a procedure, the question is there a likelihood that the procedure could add more quality and quantity of days, at least equal to the risk of the procedure? So you want to kind of balance those things. If there's some risk to life, or if there's some questions of fitness for the surgery, is there a substantial reason to understand that it would add quantity and quality of days? So it's really often a judgment call, but those are the things to use to make those decisions. So everybody has a right to life and a right to death as well, so you don't have to just kind of do everything the doctors and the hospital tells you.
I'm going to put you on the stand one more time, Father. The next topic is reproductive rights. So as a lawyer, I'm bound by the courts by Roe v. Wade, and I don't feel like going there. But since it's a Catholic institution, you do have the right to discuss women of bearing age do have the right to discuss their reproductive rights. Again, I always say to talk to your priest, and I would just, his father. Would you mind giving the church's teaching?
Sure.
So I don't get in trouble.
Can you be more specific on the
So basically, the question I get a lot from young women, actually, or childbearing women, is it morally permissible to choose the life of choose your life? If, for example, I've had some women who have had multiple children who are question whether or not they want to have, if they had cancer or something. This isn't like abortion on demand. This is like if something were to happen, is it okay for them to authorize an abortive proceeding in those kind of scenarios? And I always say I do not know. I stay away from the abortion topic as much as possible. I'm an estate attorney.
Okay. So I guess there's two things to consider here, two different scenarios. And maybe we should do a whole video and talk on this.
Oh, you probably could.
I think that, maybe I'll just talk out loud for a minute. So if a woman is in a situation where the doctor is recommending a procedure that might bring about the loss of a pregnancy, of a life that she's carrying, but there's a good reason to understand that it would save her life, I think, my understanding is it is morally acceptable to go through that procedure. If the intention of it is to save her life, even though there's a risk that the child will be lost. There might be another situation where they say, if we perform this abortion, there's a much better chance that you would live, and that is not morally acceptable to take that life, to have an abortion, to increase your odds of health. So it's a matter of, yes, that's the understanding of it.
Thank you, Father.
With this, and there's the whole idea of eggs, saving eggs. No go with Catholic Church.
Actually, that's on there too. So. Thank you for letting us into that one. So again, the point of kind of asking your father again is just to kind of highlight, yes, when you get to a lawyer's office to make these decisions, please do not feel like, don't feel like you have to rely on your lawyer for every answer. Feel free to take your time to talk to your priest, your doctor, your accountant, your financial planning, your insurance agent, your social worker, to find out like what's best for you and your morality and your religious beliefs. As a lawyer, I can tell you what the options are, and I can give you like the legal kind of pros and cons of each one, kind of like an economic analysis, but I can't really, as a lawyer, I cannot opine on what morality is for you, and especially a specific religion. Even if it's my own religion, I try not to opine on what my faith means, just because I'm not trained in it. And like Tom said too, it's better to let the experts advise you accordingly.
Can I ask you a question?
Oh, sure.
Well, we're talking about things that never would have even occurred to me when I was a young person. If you look at the crowd, most of us are beyond childbearing age.
There are a few.
And we're not even thinking about this. So my question is, with this type of thing, if our kids came up to us, these are things that I always thought we did later in life. Are you telling us that our children even now should be worried about having advanced directives and all this stuff done? And at what age do people start thinking about this? Because it never would have occurred to me to have it done when I was younger.
So I told my godson when he graduated college that he hasn't done it yet, but I told him if you're old enough to have a job, you're probably old enough to have a power. Actually, as soon as you turn 18, you are a legal adult. So your parents can no longer have, as a parent, you no longer have rights. You can't just go, when you're a parent, when you have minor children, you're able to go to the doctor and you're able to get their health records. After 18 or thereabouts there, you have to, unless they authorize it with that specific doctor, they are independent adults. So if something were to happen to them, all these HIPAA laws and all these kind of questions, I basically say, if you're in college, you should probably get both of them. I know I did my power of attorney when I was in law school under Tom. It was actually very beneficial as best-selling lawsuit because, you know, we have no money at the time. And it was actually very beneficial for me personally to have my parents kind of be able to be on my accounts or to have that power of attorney just to make sure, like, if I didn't pay a phone bill or something. But yeah, I mean, definitely by like, and I would say if you're getting married, definitely, because that's a lot of our clients, like Catholic clients, a lot of them when they get married, they want to make these decisions because pregnancy does come up a lot, and a lot of them do want to be very cautious about, a lot of them are, a lot of the female Catholic clients we get want to make sure, the reason they do this is because they actually want to make sure that that the child's life is preserved over their own, and they want to make sure that's in writing. And so, yeah, I mean, that's usually when we recommend doing it. Go ahead.
Another question you had mentioned, the ability to pay the bills. A few years ago, Art Magazine did a thing where a lot of parents were putting their kids' names on their savings account as joint members. And what happened was in some states, the parent died before the child, or the child died before the parent. And because of the state law, the child had this little bit of money in there, but they had to pay taxes on what was considered the property rights. So the question is, when you do financial powers of attorney, is that totally separate from that? Is that not affected? Or
Actually, it's a good question because it's going to lead into the later slide I'll tell you right now. Power of attorney is very useful during your life. At the moment of your death, that ends, and your will basically takes over. And so in your scenario, actually, I had a client at St. Camilla's who's also another Dematha grad, a little younger than me. I think he was my sister-in-law's age. Died at the age of 25, and poor parents are beautiful people, and we had to do the estate. He had some, you know, a couple $100 in these accounts, and he had some life insurance policies, but we had to open the estate up to kind of get this processed. Again, it was fine the way it was such a small estate, it wouldn't have mattered, but I mean, had he done a will, it would have been a little bit easier to process. But yeah, but as regard to the taxes, I'm not sure. I know in Maryland we don't assess, well, Maryland does assess an inheritance tax on everyone, but there are certain exemptions. Usually if you're a first degree relative, parent, child, sibling, grandchild, or grandparent, you're exempt, but everyone else has to pay. I know that probably wouldn't be in that scenario, but I don't know which state it is. I don't know which state you're talking about, because all the states have different taxation laws. I just know DC and Maryland have those exceptions on their inheritance taxes, but it could be income tax too. Do you have a question?
I was just going to say, as one of the younger people here, whenever I go to doctor's appointments or like doctor's offices, a lot of them ask now if I have an advance directive. So I think doctors are kind of pushing it. And for me personally, having kids is what made me think I need to get the will, because like you said, making sure your kids are taken care of is something happens to.
Oh, okay.
Well, it's the law in Maryland that they have to, I'm a retired social worker, and it's the law in Maryland that they have to pass on.
And the other thing is, even if you don't want to get a lawyer, the Attorney General of Maryland in 2013, by the Maryland legislature actually ordered that the Attorney General make up a standard medical directive for any resident. So anybody, if you have access to Google, all you do is type in Maryland Advanced Medical Directive, a form comes up. You can do it yourself. We always advise to have at least an attorney, or make sure someone else is looking at it. But the purpose of at least in Maryland, the purpose of and DC has done it too, and I think a lot of states are starting to come to it. I know Maryland's one of the first ones, but the legislature's goal is that they want to make sure that anybody over the age of 18 has the ability to designate who is going to make medical decisions if you're incapacitated at any age, and also to say what kind of decisions you want made, at the end of life. And it could happen, it could happen today. You never know what you're going to get hit by a car. You could get leukemia at the age of 40. You just don't know what God's going to give you. But it's so important. It's such an important thing. That's why it's one of the most important documents that even the legislatures across the country are basically ordering our attorney generals to make these documents accessible to the public so anybody can fill this out. And they try to make it as simple as possible so they try to remove as much legalese as possible so you can understand it. Go ahead.
So for people who put this stuff off until later in life, does it make sense to have spouses do power of attorney if you're both getting into the thing where maybe they're not going to be the best decision makers? Is there a
because they both love each other and they both are committed. Actually, there is, okay, yes, there are situations actually, and I've actually had some clients like this, where we're actually changing it because the spouse has had dementia. That's the number one I'll say. I think another one, cancer as well, is where the spouse is just not in the best state of mind and probably would not be the best person for that. And so the healthier spouse will usually update their advance directive to have like an adult child. It's usually like an adult child or niece or nephew.
But the standard then is still to have the spouse and only address that when it becomes an issue.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it might be but again, it all depends on the circumstances. But for the most part, I mean, that's usually what we do. Go ahead.
Hey, Steve.
Oh, good.
So you probably have more slides.
Oh, yeah.
How about if you go
slides?
through your presentation, then we save questions and ask them at the end? Does that
What is that?
work?
That last thing, DNR, what is MOSD?
Oh, the moist form. Actually, it should be MOIST. Sorry, typo.
MOISD?
Oh, DNR. One last thing on medical directives. DNR do not resuscitate. I just want to make sure everyone knows that a DNR is actually a medical order signed by a doctor to not resuscitate you. You cannot have it. Does. You can mention that you like that in your medical directive, but it has no legal effect. It's only a doctor can do that. So if you want a DNR signed, you have to go to your doctor to have it done. And even then, there are certain circumstances where it can be overridden by another doctor. Again, that's why I say, when you talk about estate planning, it's really an interdisciplinary thing. It's not just one. It's not just the lawyer. It really is like your social worker, your doctor, your priest, your minister. Okay. The boss saying move on. The next one, we kind of talked about this power of attorney. So when you're alive, you can do a power of attorney that can help pay bills and whatnot. There are other kind of ways. This just to kind of headway into estates. There are ways in which you can actually circumvent the power of attorney. Is by having a trust, basically putting your properties into a trust, which will actually survive your death. Because when you die, your power of attorney is null and void. And for example, if you have bank accounts in your name, you can't have access to it if estate's opened, normally. But if you were to put it into a trust, it survives your death and you're able to put funds in it. Actually, I can talk about it because my good friend Jane said it too. Our beloved Father Smarsh, actually, I was privileged enough to be I was actually one of his altar boys, and I was privileged enough that he called me to have him update his will. And we actually did that. We did put some of his investments into a trust, so that way his sister is his power of attorney, so that way his sister could access funds after his death to pay certain medical expenses, and it was actually a big relief for the funeral to kind of get that done. I mean, he was probably one of the best clients, and if you want to talk about being prepared, Father Charles Smart was one of the best. Okay, disposition of last remains. This is a picture of our beloved Pope John Paul the Great. In Maryland, this actually can be included in your medical directive, but it technically is a separate document. And this is where where Father Andrew was talking about what to do at the end of life. This is what happens after your death. You can the first thing about it is picking a custodian. Again, it could be your spouse, it could be your child. You want to be able to pick somebody that takes care of your remains. Who's going to be the person that fills out the death certificate? Who's the person that's going to contact the church to make the arrangements? Who is the person that is going to contact the funeral home? The next part of it is there's an anatomical gift section. If you want to give organs, you're free to do so. You can be specific about it. You can say what types and how it's to be used. The next part of it is the ceremonial part. And this is where Father Andrew and Father Mark are really getting into it. It's like, what do you want done? I know on ours, we definitely address, what funeral home you want to be at, what kind of liturgy, what kind of ceremony do you want, what kind of religion it's going to be, where you want to be buried, and how you want to be buried too. The one thing I noticed you didn't mention, Padres, there is also an option to be buried at sea. Yes. If you're a Navy, a lot of guys in the Navy, you have the right. There's a legal right. You can actually be buried at sea, like where your command post was. Oh no, I have no idea. Actually, I have no idea. It just came to me. I have no idea what the position was at burial. They're turning around, so I don't know. But that's a good question though for the priest. If anyone wants to know, Maybe one day they could, maybe I would, I have no idea. It's an interesting question though.
Just
Just like
toss in a
saying
Navy
we
freeze.
can't, dispose of bodies in other places.
I know, that's what I was just thinking as, because I was going through the form. It's like, I don't know if we've ever talked about that. So, it wasn't a Catholic person, but I just thought of that. I was like, I don't know what that would be, so. I moved along.
Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
If you have anatomical gifts and it's not being done as an organ donor, you get sent for medical research, et cetera,
Yeah.
do you have to provide in there that once they are done, that those remains, since they are part of our body, are properly disposed of as Catholics we would want? Do they have provisions for, or what, do they own them once it's done and you forget about it?
That is an excellent question. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I do know that there are medical there are medical, I know there's a medical procedure.
Depending on the circumstances, I've had people when I in my career who have had, unusual diseases, for instance, and they can donate to their work to an organization. But in the process of doing that, the organization offers the option. You can get the remains back and have a proper funeral.
Okay.
For other people, they might say cremate, but, and they would do it themselves.
Okay.
But generally, any organization like, I know Johns Hopkins, Maryland Anatomy Board, they will offer you the option.
So after your death, what happens to your property? It's called probate. And so there are going to be probate assets and non-probate assets. A probate asset is basically an asset that you own exclusively. You don't co-own it with anybody, and there's no beneficiary form. So if you own a house in your own name, it'll become probate. Same with most personal property is. Your pets actually are considered property. I hate to bring it to the pet owner. I know there are people in our wills, we make sure they are counted. We do give them a special section, but legally they count them as property. Cars, banks, accounts, whatever. If you do have a beneficiary form, or if you're married, a lot of times you own property as joint tenants by common, so after the death of one spouse, the other spouse automatically inherits it without having to go to probate. So most times you don't have to worry about going to probate court if your spouse dies about the house. Actually, there are a lot of times people just leave the deed as it is, and it's when the other spouse passes away, that's when they'll sell it. Your estate, this is a big lengthy one. I do a lot of these for Knights of Columbus who like lots and lots of details because we also get into insurance stuff. I'm going to simplify this. Actually, I think the next slide might be easier. Yeah, let's just do this one. This is way easier. So how is your property distributed after you die? There's two ways. If you don't have a will, we call it intestate succession. And this is what happens. There's a common misnomer that if you don't have a will, it goes to the state. It just goes to the state of Maryland or DC. That's actually not correct. There's actually statutes that will determine how your property is distributed. Most times, for example, if you have children, it will be split equally among your children. If you have a spouse, it will be given to your spouse and your children, depending on the circumstances. If you don't have any spouse or children, it's given to your parents. If your parents have died, it's distributed to your brothers and sisters, and it goes on and on like that. But with probate, you're actually able to make those decisions yourself. So for example, I know we have a lot of special requests that people want to do. Sometimes they want to make sure that their daughter gets their engagement, or their granddaughter gets their engagement ring, or they want to make a couple that has two properties and they have two children. They want to say, okay, this child gets this beach house and this child gets the mountain house. This is where a will becomes really useful because you can actually kind of make these decisions, and you can state these in the will, and it will be followed under law. It also is a good point. It's also a good thing if people who have disabled children. I know I have clients that who have autism or can't remember off the top of my head, but children that who are going to need assistance throughout the rest of their life. You can actually create. You can basically form a trust fund for them within the will to kind of make sure they're provided for and cared for. You can also disinherit people that you don't like. So for example, I think the more common one for Catholics is if you have those pesky children who just don't go to church or who just didn't go to church or anything, and or maybe they're just living life large and they have tons of money, you can disinherit, or you can change the percentages, so you don't have to split it equally. You can say, okay, this child gets 10%, this child gets 40, and this child gets the other 50. It also is used a lot of times. Also, if you have a blended family, also, so you're divorced and you have stepchildren, you can make those determinations whether or not you want your stepchildren or stepnieces and nephews or what have you to get property, or if you don't want them to inherit. The one thing I have to say though is, if you are married, though, there is nothing that a will do to disinherit them. Under the statute of most states, your spouse will get something. It's called a spousal election. And this is a big case that we come into, and I know Tom has a great example of this that he dealt, and I've dealt with it too. When you have that Las Vegas wedding, like 50 years ago, and you never got married, you never got divorced, you die without a will, that person comes out of your life out of the woodwork and wants all the money from your beloved nieces and nephews. It becomes a nightmare. I don't think it really applies here, but if you know anybody that is who might have that Las Vegas marriage, it's really important to get divorced if you want it, because otherwise that person will still get the money. Also, you can also give charities to money. These are kind of the rules from Tom. I just kind of summarized them a bit. His big rule number one is always hire an attorney, because the attorney will help you write the will in the correct format. There is a certain procedure how it has to be signed. Two witnesses. It doesn't need to be notarized, except there is a notarization part that helps you later on. He also always recommended, again, I think we talked about this, the strength and weaknesses of your agents or your executors. Another thing that comes out, a lot of people who have out-of-state properties, like if you have your Delaware Beach house or your West Virginia mountain house, it gets real. Maryland is one of those, Maryland just loves increasing your tax rates. And so they will actually include all of your money, any properties that you have in other states, they will actually count that as Maryland property and try to raise your estate tax. Well, most people don't have estate taxes, but if there's an inheritance tax, there's always a probate fee. It will raise the probate fee. They will try to get as much money as possible. So Tom always makes sure, I actually do, if you have a property out there, make sure you put it into a trust so that way it doesn't touch Maryland probate and you don't have to worry about that. You also want to consider, worst case scenarios. What if a child precedes you or adult child precedes you? It gets into another slide. Also be careful about naming someone other than your spouse. Like if you want to name, if you're a widow or widower, if you want to name an adult child as a co-signer or a co-owner to your bank accounts, there are some good benefits. I think a power of attorney is probably a cleaner way of doing it, because after you die, that child inherits all the money. And so if you have like $100,000 in there and you have your house was worth that, your child will inherit that $100,000, and it's only if that sibling really wants to be nice they can give it to the other two. But if not, they are totally legal to keep it. Also, just make sure digital records is another thing that's pretty popping up now. If you have Facebook, emails, whatnot, make sure you kind of keep a record of that, because by law, your executor actually has access to that to shut them down or create legacy pages. And finally, if you do want to update it, please do not cross out or touch the original document, because it actually destroys the document, and we have to create a whole new will. I've seen people do it, and if you actually scratch on it and cut it out, the court will actually throw the whole thing out, and you'll be back in intestate. So it's really important, if you want to update it, to go hire a lawyer and have it done amended the right way. I put up my beautiful nephews, Jackson and Amir. So this is kind of talking to some of our younger clients. It's really important to talk about your children. So God forbids what happens to you if something happens. In your will, you are able to nominate people to take care of your children after you and your spouse are both dead. I can't stress this enough. This is one of our biggest growing client bases. And a lot of times, a lot of our Catholic families, we have a lot of wonderful grandparents that are being named on here for the time being. But without, this is where it kind of becomes a nightmare and I've seen it before, and it's painful, where both parents die, and you have two sets of grandparents fighting over the kids. It's really sad. It does happen. I've seen it in Prince George's County. It's heart-wrenching. And it's something that you don't have to, it's something that you can avoid just by doing a simple will. Cannot stress it enough. If you do have minor kids, it's really important to get this will. It doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be super crazy, but just naming those people who are having a conversation with them. And also, you can also make sure if you want one set of grandparents to be the primary guardians, you can also specify, the other thing is you can also specify that the other grandparents have certain visitation rights. You can also state, and I know a lot of my good Catholic friends have done this, if you want to make sure that they go to Catholic school, you can state it in there, and you can also, usually they use life insurance, a lot of our Knights of Columbus, they'll use their life insurance policies, they put it into an insurance trust that will actually make sure that they have enough life insurance to pay for their kids' Catholic school education until they get through high school. So, another important thing. Again, this is just a little way to avoid some final cost here. We always encourage clients to prepay your account, prepay your funeral cost. You can actually, not only can you go to the church, you can also go to the funeral home and prepay your funeral bill. Because one of the big things after you die is that there is usually a $10,000 or $15,000 funeral bill. A lot of people just don't have that kind of money lying around. And it's really the liability of the person. And it usually will get paid out. And life insurance, life insurance is also supposed to cover, but it doesn't come out quickly. But you can do your kids and loved ones a great service if you can prepay that, so that way we don't have to worry about it in the future. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. And so yes, everyone should have an estate plan. Again, these are again, sorry, this is for the Knights. They really push life insurance. I always have to put it on front, but we're not. The Knights aren't here, right? Okay, good. But yeah, power of attorney, medical directive, last will and testament, declaration, and trust and custody if the circumstances warrant it. Yeah, and this we already talked a lot about this, but yeah. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, questions? Go.
Yeah. What happens to property that can't be sold?
You want the answer? It's not pretty. It stays in probate until it's sold. I've seen that happen too. I saw one that there was a big property that had an HOA, and they couldn't sell it for 16 years.
Wow.
And so they had to keep the accounting going. Actually, the kids got so fed up they stopped paying the HOA. So I was actually representing the HOA person to get the money out of them. But luckily, it actually finally sold, and they actually were able to do it. It took them 17 years to sell it. So that's what happens.
Can I make a comment on that?
Yeah, go for it.
Our daughter lives in the mountains of Georgia, and my family's always saying, when are you going to move, where are you going to go to? And she lives in an area, and she's been there since I can't tell you how long, but there are houses where she lives that have been on the market for years and years and years. And the first thing I started thinking about when I'd see these wonderful property bills on TV, I asked myself, is that house that I want to move to be sellable? Because I don't want my kids being stuck with a piece of property that they have to deal with for years and years and years. So if you decide to move and relocate, people need to think about the effects it's going to have on your estate when they do move. So just a comment.
And it would be my understanding that if you do nothing, there's no harm, no foul, no harm.
If you don't write a will?
No, you don't.
Oh, if you do nothing, no, there is harm.
Property taxes, if you don't pay anything in the.
That's assuming that your estate and your kids or your heirs are paying them. A lot of times, so what they'll do is the kids will start paying the property taxes because they don't want to lose it. If you don't, it's something basically, if there's a mortgage on it and you don't pay, the estate goes into foreclosure, the house gets foreclosed on, and all those wonderful proceedings. If you don't pay your tax bill, it goes to a tax auction. And the property is sold to the lowest bidder. And the government, and again, when you do this, it's just sold for the least amount of money to get rid of it, and it never pays all the bills, so the kids get nothing out of it. So that's
But
the
if it's not worth anything.
Well, you just let it go, yeah. Another idea is like if you really think that's an issue, like I know some people will actually talk about, maybe gifting it to a neighbor or something, or try to work something out with the government. Actually, one of my favorite clients are the College Park Woods Pool. We actually had a piece of property. We had a pool actually I used to go to when I was a kid. That just was falling apart, and it was kind of a tough property to sell. And we actually it took us, what, 5-7 years? But we negotiated to sell it to the city of College Park, who decided to take it and revamp it. So there are ways around it. But you got to do it while you're alive.
We've had experience with two particular cases. One was no property. The person went into care, sold the properties. And the inheritance and will went through in about 2 or 3 months. With properties, it can take, if the person goes into care, it's better to sell the properties. Is that true? Because the other way can take a year or 2.
If you think it's not going to be sold like during your lifetime, if you think it's a problem after your death, is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying if there's no property, everything goes through within a month or 2.
Mm-hmm.
If there is property, it all has to go through the process of completing all the papers and all the work, and you have to go through the sales and then go through.
Yes, it does. And even if you have bank accounts, it still has to go through that process unless you put a beneficiary on death on it. I mean, right now we have a couple of states just like that due to the coronavirus and just Prince George's being the way it is, sadly. Our register is not the best. I shouldn't say that. We're just not the timeliest. There's a lot of delay time, and it's unnecessary. If you want to talk to your state senators or representatives, please do. I know because it's driving me nuts now. But like sometimes I will wait like 5 or 6 months just to get the letters of administration or to open the estate after we file it, just for like a bank account. And so you can't even touch that money. So if you want to you can tell your case if you want. But yeah, it's so honestly, if you're in Prince George, it's probably best to put it into a trust, so that way you can just access the fund right away, and you don't have to worry for it.
So just one clarification, it's not major. So prepaying for your the funeral home is a great idea. So you mentioned prepaying a parish for a funeral. So who can tell me how much a funeral costs? 0.
Yeah.
So we don't charge for any sacraments. Again, it's a slight but important clarification. So we never charge for any sacraments. So there's no charge for a funeral. There are musicians that we give stipends to them. So we recommend to the family. We let them know what the recommended gift is. And we do ask them to help us with a few stipends. But again, it's just important for us to just clarify, never any charge for sacraments.
Thank you, Father. Again, the clients we have, they usually have enough money. They want to give a donation, so you can give a pre-donation if you would like to. Go ahead.
I was just curious, wills versus trusts, I mean, are most people doing trusts now instead of wills, or are they not mutually exclusive?
They're not mutually exclusive. I think it depends on your situation. A lot of times if you were kind of younger, we say probably don't put it into a trust just yet, because if you have a mortgage and you think you're going to refinance a couple times, you end up having to take the property in and out of the trust, and it ends up costing you a little extra money. And so you can actually put a trust within it. It's called a testamentary trust, so we could do it that way. It's usually when you've kind of paid it off, then we kind of recommend just putting it into a trust. If you really, especially if you live in Prince George's County or DC, because those orphans probate courts are just super, super slow. And it doesn't matter how, one of my good friends, Lynn Skirpum, was the Register of Wills, and she can't even get certain things processed fast enough. And she practices in Prince George's County. Great.
And it's faster with a trust then?
Yeah, because with a trust, you basically the trust creates a separate entity, and it basically passes through a will. And so when you die, it's just basically the successor trustee signs a piece of paper saying, okay, I take the office, the heirs all sign off on it, you're ready to go. And then the bank accounts open up, you can sell the property right away, you don't have to wait for anything. And it's actually cheaper with legal fees too. You pay more up front with paying to the trust because it's more complicated, but at the end, you don't pay as much because we don't have to do as much work anymore. Go ahead.
I'd like to offer a resource from my own experience in doing a trust or trying to finalize it. You mentioned the state's attorney has the advance directives. What I found really helpful as a Catholic is to go to the website for the U.S. Catholic Conference of Catholic Bishops, because they presented advance directives in kind of the Catholic way. And it's a lot, it's a big packet of information, but it's very good. I would like to, maybe as a follow-up to this someday, just have a workshop on the Catholic advance directives information.
I think I might know what you're talking about. I think there's also some canon law in there too.
USCCB.org. USCCB.
I'm not a canon lawyer though, so I'm not allowed to talk about canon law. It's fascinating.
In the case of a trust, are there any assets or say an insurance policy that's best kept out of the trust?
Your car, definitely. Do not put your car in trust.
Why?
In case you have an accident.
Why?
You do not want to put your automobile or a boat or anything that has high liability, because if it gets into an accident, if you have your car and your beach house and everything, and you get sued for millions of dollars, and you lose the judgment, they could basically force a sale of the house and take all your money. So always keep the car. We never encourage you to keep the car's one. Guns are another one. There's actually a special guns trust you can do. But other than that, I mean, it's usually the main things we put into the trust are your residential property, your bank accounts, and your personal items.
But if you don't put your vehicles in the trust, then you have to go through state county probate just for the
Actually,
vehicles.
no, Maryland changed it. You can actually make a beneficiary to your car now. So just go to the DMV and you can actually list who you want to have your car.
Right.
So do that.
So you won't have to go through probate for vehicles.
Yes, because actually, that's another part. That's another key part too. Selling cars in probate is not fun because they're used and they need work and what.
So if you do a beneficiary for your vehicle, you do not have to open up probate for your
If
vehicles?
you have no other estates, no, you don't have to open probate.
For your vehicles?
Yeah, if you put everything to a trust, you
Right.
put everything in beneficiary, you don't even have to go through probate.
Right, but don't put your vehicles in the trust.
No, don't do that. Just
So
beneficiary.
just leave a beneficiary and you won't have to go through probate for the vehicles?
Yep.
Okay.
So your life insurance policy can stay out of the trust maybe?
Actually, yeah, life insurance policy is actually a third-party contract, so your heirs will get that automatically. It just takes a while because it just takes a little longer. The money's just not. It doesn't come like right when you need to pay the funeral. That's all. Like it usually takes about like a month or so to get the money out of it. You can actually put it into a special insurance. You can put it into an insurance trust. This is for people that are really wealthy that have like more than $11 million and they're going to be subject to some massive. I mean, I personally don't. I don't know if anyone in this room is. Come see me afterwards. I'd love to talk to you about your money. But no, I think that's what it's used for primarily. Or like I said, if you have young kids, we've done it for that too. Like some of my friends in the Knights of Columbus, I've done it for. If you want to make sure that your kids, because a lot of them want to make sure that their kids can go to Catholic high school, and so they'll buy like $2 million of insurance. And they'll put it into this separate insurance trust that will cover their Catholic school. Go ahead.
So on the opposite end of the financial spectrum, in your number one recommendation of talking to an attorney to get all this started, what are we looking at in terms of costs for a visit or consultations or things like that?
Boy, I never tell. It's interesting. We have a whole fee schedule. I'm sure we can send it to you. I don't remember it off the top of my head. I know like it's usually about like 500 is like the basic one for everything.
I talked to 2 lawyers, and
We're also cheap.
Well, both of them said for doing it for a spouse, it starts at $1,500
Yeah.
for all the documents.
I'm on the Tom Gentile school. We have a much cheaper way of doing it.
That's what I was going to ask you.
No, there are lots. Yeah, there are several of those Catholic lawyers. And then the DC Catholic Charities it's called the Legal Network. They do a lot of pro bono, but they also do, if you're interested, and also the DC a parish, like I know we advertise here. We don't do this. What we do is we give you the discounts. Some of them won't give you a discount, but what they'll do is they'll give 10% of their regular fee to the church. I know our widows don't do that. We just rather you take the deduction yourself because it's probably more advantageous than paying us. Then we have to pay more people. So.
This may seem like an absurd question in a way, but I'm not sure.
What's up?
Yeah, how you doing? Can a person die without a lawyer? Can a person die without a lawyer?
Of course they can. They do it all the time. What happens is basically it goes through intestate. It's totally doable. It just takes a little longer. The big thing is that you have to get all of your relatives to agree. And it's okay if you have like a small family, or if you have a very simple family. If you have a spouse or just kids, it's great. I mean, it's usually we can just get all of them to sign off on it, and you're good to go. It's the people that I know we've actually. I definitely know one parishioner here that we had who didn't have. I'm sorry, this woman. She didn't have a husband, no kids. Her parents died, no siblings. Her grandparents obviously are dead. Her aunts and uncles were dead. She had first cousins, and we had to do she did write a will, thank God. But if she hadn't done the will, what we were looking at is like getting, I think, 20 people we would have had to have contacted to get them to sign off on this estate, and then would have split. She picked up one cousin, and that cousin just took everything, thank God. But if you have, that's an example of what to do, because if she hadn't, that estate would have been a nightmare to have done, because we would have been talking to people in Hawaii and all sorts of stuff. Go ahead.
It's just in my own particular case. I have a wife and I have a son who's not a minor. And I have some family in New York, but they're like first degree relatives. They're like brothers and sisters. Okay. Who would I need to be concerned about?
Great question. It's Nick, right? Is your son?
Yes.
He was in my brother's class.
Yes, he was. I remember.
In my class.
Wait, who are you?
Lisa McAllister.
Oh shit, hi Lisa. I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. Whoa, really going back. Worst case scenario, what happens if God forbid something happens to your spouse and your son and he doesn't have, or even if he does have kids, it goes to then it goes into a really special process. Especially if you have grandchildren, and this is another big thing. If you do have grandchildren and your kids haven't done their estate, you probably should, and I know I've done this for several people, you do want to make sure that you list some sort of trustee, basically, to take care of the, so if your minor grandchildren are inheriting property, because if you don't list anybody, it actually goes into a guardianship case, and the court will appoint somebody, sometimes it's a lawyer who actually charges the kids for doing this. It's best if you can pick somebody that you know and love and trust. If you can even the spouse, doesn't matter, but to avoid that special proceeding, because it does turn into a nightmare. But it's a game of risk. I mean,
Is it wrong to assume, for instance, that like if I were to die and my wife and son were to survive me, that they would simply just inherit whatever I own?
They totally could do it, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a game
They
of
would
risk.
get it, right?
So, yeah.
It wouldn't be anybody else.
No, it wouldn't be. No, that's the thing. It's a game of risk. We don't know what the future is. But in that circumstance, yeah, we have tons of people that do that, and it's no problem.
Thank you.
Does it go into probate at that point, or just actually goes right?
It depends. If you own the house with your wife, it goes. I mean, there's no probate. I'm assuming if you have everything titled with your wife, she's just gonna get everything.
Right.
So it's really not an issue, and a lot of times that does happen. It's usually when the first spouse dies, the second spouse goes and gets the will, because after that, you don't have that spousal transfer that everything just transferred over. There's no big deal. There is no need for probate. We actually printed out someone in Berlin Heights too, because poor woman tried to probate everything, and I was telling her, you don't need to probate any of this. You already own it. So we got rid of this probate thing. It was driving her crazy. But yeah.
Okay, thank you.
How do you deal with family members who don't even want to discuss it? I became sick this spring unbeknownst to my family.
Oh, say that again, I'm sorry.
I became sick unbeknownst to my family.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't tell them. They always said, oh, you're going to live forever. Let's not talk about it. Don't be the party pooper. And I always feel like it should be done as a group thing, because I want them all involved, but at the same time, they don't want anything to do with it, they don't want to discuss it, it's like, don't tell me about this, it's not gonna happen now. And they're just, it's almost like they're in denial that we're getting old and this could happen, and they get really mad when I bring it up, and then they just cut me off.
I know for our firm, I've had people like that, and what they've done, I mean, it's up to you. What they'll do is they'll actually again, the Tom Gentile method, we do our side, we just go to homes so we can cut down our costs on paying rent and everything. But we actually will go to your house, and if you want, you can have what sometimes they'll have like an estate meeting basically, or a family meeting, and they'll bring the lawyer in, and then the parent will basically be telling, kind of talking with the lawyer, and then the kids ask questions and whatnot. You're allowed to do it. I mean, you might even be able to do it with I don't know if the priest or the bereavement ministries and stuff like that. I think it's up to them. But I don't know if you guys entertain this kind of family. We've done it, but.
Well, what about like picking one child and talking to that one child and getting them on the same page as you?
I'm concerned because the person I picked is not the oldest one, and I don't want any friction and say, why did you choose this person over the other one? I want to understand why I picked them, but I don't want, if I discuss with them separately, it's like, well, why did you discuss it with me? Because I've had that happen in other situations, like, why did you keep me out of the loop? And I don't want to offend any of them, but I know why we've chosen the one person that we want to do. And it's not to offend anybody, it has to be the state of mind, whether they want to follow like an advance directive or something like that. And I just don't know whether the other member could handle it, and I don't want that person to be offended.
Right, they may not be organized or be able to understand.
That's exactly
I've seen that too. I mean, a lot of times they're not as,
Yeah.
I don't know, I've seen people do that as well. They don't always pick the oldest. And I mean, usually it's kind of understood. They don't really, I don't know, I've never had that scenario where we had to talk. I know we've done where the kids don't want to talk about it. They want to make sure that everyone's on board.
Yeah.
So they want to make sure the kids are there for the signing. We all talk about what this means. Yeah, I don't know about that one. I feel like Father Mark's idea.
I can address that. We began talking about my father. Maybe we have to wrap up, so maybe one final story about him. Hopefully you can stick around for a little bit longer to answer any other questions. Our bereavement ladies are here. Father Andrew and Marie are both here. So this one final story about my father. Like I mentioned, he was just always ready. He was prepared to die young or die early. So when my sisters got to a certain age, he would sit down with them and he would show them all of his notebooks. He was really organized. He had all of the finances and everything very clearly documented. And he would show them the drawer of his desk where he kept all the important documents. I don't know why he never showed my brothers. I think probably my brothers are more immature. He was trusting my sisters that they would be responsible for this. So they would roll their eyes and like one would say, yeah, I got it, yeah. He showed me as well. He explained all that to me as well. But when the time came, they all knew and everybody was very prepared. So it might not be a comfortable thing, but I think it just takes some strength to pull it all together, have it in one spot, and maybe just with one person or one at a time, make sure they know where it is. So I think the point of a lot of this is to avoid some of the things you're worried about. What if you designate someone who's not the oldest, but you want the rest of them to listen to that one? So that's the benefit of putting it in writing and taking care of all of this. So again, plenty of time for one-on-one questions. I'm happy to answer any questions one-on-one as well as we finish. But Steve, thanks so much for coming. Really great stuff and a very clear presentation, so thank you.
Thank you.